Oh, and a very warm welcome to Friday Live with me, Phil Crowshaw. And I'm delighted to be back because last week, all the millions of people around the world who watch this show. Yeah, okay, I'm dreaming. But one or two people might have noticed I wasn't around last week, and that was because I was really suffering, really suffering on a beach in Crete, to be precise, which is why I've got a little bit of a Maltese ahead, which tends to happen when you go in the sun with a bald head. But there you go. That's the way it goes. And some people can think I look like Yul Brynner, and then most other people are going, "Who the hell's he?" But there you go. That's life. So we're back. We're back at live. We're live streaming as always, multi-live streaming on Facebook, YouTube, and of course the wonderful LinkedIn. So I'm delighted today to have a new guest on the show. And my guest this week is a gentleman by the name of Andy N. Sounds like a DJ, doesn't it? But it intrigued us all, it draws us all in, and we'll be asking Andy N all about who he is and what he's about very shortly. So, Andy, a very warm welcome to the show. Tell us a little bit about who you are and what it is you're interested in and passionate about and where you spend most of your time.
Hi, Phil. Thanks for inviting me on board today. It's a pleasure for this. I've been really enjoying your show recently as well. Of course, I am Andy N, and I'm passionate about writing and all the things in my life that have come from it.
Fantastic. So how did that come about? I mean, did you kind of just come out the womb and pick up a pen? Or what exactly happened? How did you get into writing in the first place?
Nearly, because I started writing when I was about 10, actually, would you believe, originally. Because I'm a bit odd in the sense of I've got every single poem. I'm really a poet. And I've got nearly every poem I ever wrote, actually, in a little A5 hardback book. And the first one dates back to when I was 10. And I wrote a terrible poem at school called Colours of the Sky, and which is pretty nondescript it was. But the fun started when I did my second poem about a couple months later. Because the school I was at, we went on a day trip over to Chester Zoo. And we ended up, the day after we got back, we got asked to write a poem about our adventures in Chester Zoo. And I didn't like the teacher very much I had. And I wrote a poem called The Kill, about lions breaking out the cage and eating the teacher.
Oh, that was popular.
I got 2 weeks detention on it. So. And after that, the book bit, really. So.
And did you get a feeling that you were naturally good at this? At what point did you suddenly think, actually, I'm pretty good at this?
It took some years later, to be honest with you, because that one talked about when I was 11. I did a degree in creative writing when I was 28, and I hadn't really wrote much over my 20s, and I ended up writing 1 or 2 pieces in year or so after I went to uni, and I decided, I thought, I'm really enjoying this. I want to do more of it. And I thought, I need probably a bit of guidance, which direction to go next. And I ended up going to Bolton Uni. And 1998, when I was 28, and I did a joint degree in creative writing and acting.
Sorry, Andy, you'll have to repeat that. Your broadband dropped out. Try repeating that last bit.
Sure. I went to university in 1998 when I was 28. Because I wanted to try and improve myself as a writer after doing a few poems in my late 20s. And I knew that was the direction I wanted to go. So I ended up signing up for a joint degree course in creative writing and acting.
So would you say that in terms of how your career transpired, was it one of those things where you identified a real skill and an art that you wanted to do and were good at, and then you were able to go out and monetize that? Or has it been a bit of what I call a side hustle, where you kind of have to keep the bills being paid whilst you play in the sandpit of your passion as a side passion project? Is that how it's been?
It's always been a side passion, ours. Because if anybody knows poetry, and there is poets out there that make a full-time living off it, I'm not one of them. I've got a reasonable respect of a lot of writers, but I've never made a lot of money on it, to be honest with you. It's been something that I've always enjoyed doing the older I've got, and it's just carried on and broke off into lots of different side directions.
So what sort of side directions has it broken into then?
Yeah, well, it first of all started obviously when I was a performance poet when I first started really performing about 15, 16 years ago. And it's then broke off in directions like doing my own podcast. So I've been hosting my own podcast for 5 years now called Spoken Label. And that's where I end up interviewing poets myself. And it's grateful. Like your show here. It's if you really get a good feel for it, it's a different sort. It's like a bug, isn't it? It just bites you and goes in different directions.
Yeah, I mean, podcasting definitely, and it's a strange thing because it's not been around that long, or it has been around a fair amount of time, but it just wasn't necessarily called that. I mean, I did my first video and audio recording that I put on the internet in 2003, believe it or not. So I was very much an early adopter of it all, but it was so early that it was 3 years before YouTube, and so early on that the word podcasting didn't exist. It was just putting audio content onto the internet. That's kind of what it was. And then it developed into something. And I think what happened is obviously video took over massively as the bandwidth increased and allowed us to do video. YouTube became the big thing, and it was almost like audio and radio was past its sell-by date. But what seemed to happen is that as people got busier and busier in their lives, I think they suddenly realized that they could actually listen to good content and do other things at the same time. Where, of course, with YouTube and video, you have to really concentrate on it. So if people are watching this show, they have to concentrate more on what we're saying and our body language and all that kind of thing. Whereas if it's an audio format, they can be doing absolutely anything else at the same time as listening to it. So I think that's what drove it. And of course, as a result, podcasting just absolutely exploded. But there's still, even though people think there's a lot of them, there isn't. If you look at for example, businesses as an example, if you look at the number of businesses that there are, say, let's just keep it simple, small businesses that there are, and it's millions of small businesses, relatively few of them are doing podcasting.
Yeah, I've heard the same on that myself, and I think it's still in England anyway. I think it's still a massively expanding market. In my case, when I started doing Spoken Label to chat to poets, mine started off like interviewing lots of local writers, and the first year or two I did it, a lot of the time I had to explain to them when I was contacting them what a podcast was. And I think over lockdown and possibly the year before that, it started to become much more common now. It has, and it's been really interesting because over lockdown I've used obviously various mediums like you do to chat to poets a lot. But before that, I used to do a lot of them in cafes all over central Manchester and sometimes beyond. And my wife actually says to me sometimes she likes those older ones because you can hear the background noise and whatever's going on in the background. Yeah, but that was one thing I got into. A year or two before that, I got into podcasting. I also got into doing lots of ambient music. And that started off when a friend of mine that used to run a studio showed me some basics how to master and mix music. And we both got into the same music, formed a band together briefly. And I've been doing lots of my own little bit of music ever since. And on top of the podcasting and the writing.
Do you play any instruments or anything? Or is it all
keyboard.
Computer stuff?
I've got a keyboard.
Oh, God, blimey. Right. Yeah. I say, okay, blimey. I remember, might have mentioned on this show before that I'm very old, and I can remember hearing a song that changed my life for a period of time. And that song was Our Friends Electric by Gary Newman.
Wow. Oh, wow.
Right?
Yeah, I'm old enough to remember that as well.
Right. Well, when that came out, which I think was 79 or something like that, maybe 80, but it was that late 70s. That's the first time I can recall having actually heard a synthesizer, which was almost all the song, And I thought this sound is amazing. Long story short, then that led me over the next few years into the likes of Depeche Mode and Human League and Heaven 17 and Ultravox, and that became absolutely my music genre of the time. And also as a result of that, I ended up buying a keyboard, synthesizer, as they were kind of called then. Then I got a bigger one and a bigger one. Then I joined a band. And it really did. It took up probably a good part of I don't know, 8 to 10 years of my life at the time.
Wow.
And it really was an amazing time. So do you actually play the keyboard then? Are you a good player? Because I'm not a good player. I just plonk, plonk, plonk.
I'm of something called the Hit and Hope Brigade.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? No, it's a lot of it is that I can disguise it better. I'm more the sound man really, because I'm very good at getting a couple of chords recorded, and I'll merge something about 20 to 25 segments and to make a song out of it. It's the mixing side I probably make up for the actual playing. I'm an average player, I'll be honest with you. But that it's just because I know how to mix it really well. That's probably how I get away with a lot of what I do. Well,
of course, yeah, but mixing is a key part of it, isn't it? And almost like the main part of it nowadays. So how do you find guests for your podcast then now? Because this is something coincidentally, I ran a podcasting masterclass yesterday in an actual hotel, not online.
It's fantastic.
You know, you probably seen me and seen some of the stuff I've done, and it's all online in this office and in this studio. But you know, I'm just starting to come out of the house again.
God, yeah. I do a couple of ways really, because first of all, I don't want to start giving too much, obviously, publicity away to websites. There is a couple of websites knocking around where you can actually approach guests. And the website I'm thinking was the website I approached you on, actually.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, because I advertise my really 2 podcasts on that. I do a book review podcast with my wife as well on there, and I get a lot of guests coming through. Some guests come internationally through that certain website. But I actually co-run, and I spoke about an open mic night in Chilton called Speak Easy, and through that I get guests through that. Really, if you get a poet coming on a couple of times, I really like them. I'll be asking them, do you want to do a session as well?
Yeah, I think that's fantastic. And one of the things that I love about the whole podcasting arena is that because I'm a business consultant, trainer, and coach, that's how I make a living. That's the topic that I tend to be most involved in or around business growth, business development, startup entrepreneurship, all that. But it's fascinating when you start to look at the different types of genres and niches that there are. And that's one of the reasons. Yeah, it's one of the reasons yours stood out to me. And I thought, oh wow, you know, poetry, what an interesting, different niche area.
Yeah, I can be honest with you, the first podcast I did is then the story when I started Spoken Label off 5 and a bit years ago was, and one of my best mates is a novelist, and he's struggling with his second novel today, lad, but we can avoid that. And he asked me, I was talking to him about doing a podcast, and he said, why do you interview me first? So I went up, met up with him in Bolton, in a pub in Bolton, a noisy pub. And I would not recommend the episode because it's 2.5 hours of meeting him, getting drunker and drunker.
Blimey, that's a long podcast on poetry.
I won't do that one again. But I think over time, I'm sure you're the same, Phil, with this as well.
Yeah,
it's like over time, I've learned myself by listening a lot of time and paying attention, is to get it down to a more manageable and reasonable level.
Yeah, well, it is. It's an interesting one because a lot of people do say to me, how long do you tend to go for? And I always say it depends, because it does just depend. Some people are just very talkative. They've got lots of things to say. They've got massive stories to tell and all the rest of it. Others are slightly less so. And you know this yourself, obviously, doing these things.
Yeah, and I just mine tend to be about an hour, no more than an hour normally. So
yeah, I would say the same. I just let it flow for as long as is appropriate or necessary. But like you said there about the pub, I just recorded for the radio show an interview with a guy outside at Salford Quays, you know, being a Mancunian lad, you'll know. So just outside near Media City, and we sat outside on what was like a pub, but it's called the Beefeater. We actually did it outside, and it was wonderful. And there was the background noises and everything that were going on in the background. And that's part of a show. I'm just about to launch the show officially, the radio station officially. It's called The Journey in the next few weeks. So I'm just building up content. But what I did is I asked people I knew, would they identify 5 tracks in their life that have motivated them or inspired them most or moved them most over that time period. And it's amazing how tricky they've found it. Not because of there's not enough, because there's too many.
Yeah, that's really hard. I would have struggled with that one. I could probably name about 3 to you off the top of my head, but no, I could 5. I'd have to really put some thought into.
Well, do you know, it's amazing though. I've had people coming back to me saying, only 5. Can I have 10? Can I have 15? No, you can have 5. That's all you're having. That's all you're having. So yeah, that was, and it was great. I mean, that's one of the great things about the whole podcasting arena, which I love, is that whole idea of, you know, anywhere, any place you can do it. So as long as you've got decent quality mics and decent quality, this mixer is portable. I've got a small, something called an H6, which is also useful. But what you said a minute ago, I think is very true. I think nowadays, especially if you can do an interview somewhere where the ambient sound in the background adds to the whole experience without drowning out, obviously, the actual content, it's really, really good. If you can find places where it's got that, it gives that feel to the whole thing and not just be dry, quiet sound, which is what it's become a little bit because of COVID and having to do it here everywhere or inside everywhere.
It's not been as in that. I've enjoyed doing it and I enjoy going on podcasts, but sometimes you miss that. There's something different that's been sitting outside. That makes sense.
There is. It definitely adds something to it. I think it's the trade-off, I would say, and this is just a personal perspective, really, and everybody's different. But for me, the trade-off is efficiency versus the fun of being outside, because the reality is I can probably get 3 or 4 shows done in here, sitting here, in the time it would take me to get to Salford Quays, fight my way through the traffic, get the coffees in, chat to somebody for 20 minutes, because when you're together in that scenario, you're probably even more social. It's that trade-off, really. I prefer it out and about, but at the same time, I find it a lot more efficient to be able to do it this way. The other advantage, of course, this way as well, is I've been able to do, as you mentioned a minute ago, I've been able to do international interviews and interviews with people in London and based all over the country and all over the world, which I've been able to do just because I've been able to do it online.
Yeah, I've really enjoyed that myself, doing a podcast myself over lockdown, where I've started to speak to people in other countries and stuff. And I've had a lot from America and Canada, but I've got my next one actually, both labels from a young lady from Brazil, from just outside Sao Paulo. That was an incredible experience, that was.
Yeah, and now you're finding that the cultures make a massive difference to the creative process and the creativity within the people, because they're from different cultures.
Yeah, definite. Young lady I spoke to from Brazil, and I'm not going to name her, she was a lovely young lady, but the way she actually is telling me that how she structured a novel was, and their religious backgrounds and connotations that are in it were very much of a culture, and it was something that you wouldn't have wrote if you lived in this country. Definitely.
Yeah, and that's it, and of course, and that's the thing, you know, you do get different perspectives, and it seems, and you intimated it a few minutes ago, actually, it does seem that the whole podcasting arena seems to be significantly more advanced or more mature or much bigger in America. Is that something you've observed? I don't know if that's a perception or a reality. Definitely, and is that because people in America tend to be more extrovert and us Brits tend to be a little bit more reserved? What's your view on it?
I've had somebody said to me a couple of years ago, the way America is as a country, it's 10 to 15 years in front of us. And I think we're behind them. Not necessarily we're a backward race, we're not. It's the way we are is different as a people. And I think the podcasting game's only just started coming in now over these last couple of years, really. I think it's took us time to catch up to them, basically. And it's a massive explosion in this country at the moment, I think. And it's going to get bigger.
Yeah, and it was very interesting running the podcasting masterclass. As I told you, mentioned a minute ago that I was running. It was very interesting running that. Yeah, I ran it yesterday up in Preston, which of course you'll know, being a Northwestern lad. And it was they loved it. They were fascinated by it, and they loved it. I took the kit with me, so I did some geeky tech stuff as well, and they really enjoyed it, and they're really interested in how they could use it for their businesses, and doing channels and YouTube and everything. But at the same time, what was very interesting about it for me running the course was there was definitely some issues around self-belief and confidence in that room. There was a lot of reticence about, well, I sound awful. All those phobias I've talked about on this show before, like, phonophobia, the fear of hearing your own voice. And another big one as well, Andy, that kept coming up was, I don't know what to say.
I don't sometimes either.
And I said this to them. I said, well, that's normal. But one of the things that I find is that what seems to be a dying art in a way, and I'm old, as I said, so, I remember the days when planning was something that you did quite a lot of. And I know the world's changed and everything on many different levels, but I feel as if they've lost the art or don't understand about planning. So
yeah, it does seem to change that way, certainly.
Does that make sense? Because I think what I said to them yesterday was, if you plan and you start to do content plans and you get the flip chart out, or you scribble and think, don't just do, think and plan, you'll find it all a lot easier. But it's almost maybe a cultural thing that we seem to go for instant gratification. I want to do a podcast. Right, give me what microphone do I use? What recording device do I use? Right, go. And then they worry that they've got nothing to say. Well, they haven't done the research, have they?
Yeah, no, I agree. Every time I chat to somebody on one of the podcasts, I make sure I don't like asking set questions. I'm not like that. And you're clearly not either. No. But I will. Like, I like to have a couple of bullet points down, notes, like you said, perhaps put things in post-it notes, half a dozen things, and make sure everything's covered. And then I often chat to the person before and say, we're going to chat about this. Is there anything else we need to make sure we touch base on? Do
you do much in the way of live streaming at all yourself?
No,
live streaming?
Not really, no.
so no. This is an early live stream for you then, is it?
I've done a couple, but I won't do them on my own podcast. I'm not shy, far from it. But I usually do my own podcast. I rather get them recorded, because that way you get rid of the ers, buts. If they forget the word, swear word it, or something like that. Or it's easy sometimes. Just that way I can record it and get rid of problems, if you know what I mean.
Oh no, absolutely. I mean, I obviously I do a lot of recording stuff as well for clients and on my own. But what I've found very interesting is that again, yesterday I got asked a lot of questions about live streaming, because it's becoming more and more mainstream. It's becoming, people are seeing more and more people doing it and such like. But it sounds really cliche, but I know from my own experience that for people who do want to do live streaming, the best thing you can possibly do is some planning, like I said, but also you've got to just do it. You just got to press the button, and it is jeopardy, but that's what makes it more exciting. Anything could happen. A flaming balloon could come down and drop on the house any minute, or anything.
I did one in Stockport just for lockdown, and I remember it well because me and my wife, or my now wife, was with me. We met up with a Hungarian painter that we know. She's a lovely lady. And during this podcast, a cat comes along and jumps on one of our knees during the podcast. Don't know whose cat it was. They sit in this cafe. Then we get an airplane goes above us, and then we got a homeless man asking for money. So we had all kinds of cameos. You do it. It adds to the fun, as I would say.
Well, I think it does. I think that jeopardy adds to it. And of course, tech issues, tech challenges. I've had broadband wobble on me. before now. I plug into the now, of course, because it's video. I actually plug direct into the router now to make sure that, because I don't want to rely on Wi-Fi. But what was interesting, when I was away on holiday last week, I did a test live stream broadcast from Crete, and it worked.
Brilliant.
And it worked. Brilliant. Of course, my wife straight away saying, "This is amazing. This is fantastic. When can we move to Crete?"
Brilliant.
Because if you can do all your webinars and everything, and so are you creative then in other areas? Are you creative as a person, or is it just certain arenas?
Certain arenas, really.
Yeah.
You get, like, you could argue saying, like, some people that are creative, like, might be able to go along starting building bookcases out of nothing. I'm hopeless at that sort of thing. But long story short is I'm partially sighted, so if you let me loose building a bookcase, I'll probably hammer a nail in my hand. So,
not the smartest thing. Might go viral, but not the smartest.
You wouldn't want to see a video of me nailing a nail in my hand. That's for sure. So, I don't know. I found, and this is, I think, question seriously is, I think as a creative person, when you're really good at one thing, I think you can easily upgrade it to start becoming good at other things. Because I only learned to play piano about 5 years ago, and I never had done it before that. And it's the podcasting thing has only come in the last couple of years, so there's other things I want to have a go at myself. But he said I can't see myself becoming a professional singer. No chance of that. But yeah, I think it gives you the confidence sometimes. Seriously, when you get good at one thing, you want to try other things out, and I think it's just sometimes it's just activating a different part of your brain.
Yeah, it's true. And one of the reasons I asked you is because I'm very creative when it comes to ideas relating to business. And I'm very creative when it comes to working with clients to come up with new ideas on how to use the technologies and podcasts and everything. I find it very easy because I'm just wired that way. It's not clever, just because that's the way my brain is wired. But then other areas of creativity, like you intimated there in a way, was like pottery or physically drawing. I'm absolutely rank.
I've had to go to pottery once, and I ended up completely ruining a set of clothes. I went on a course on that. Oh, that was fun. Painting, I'm not very good at, to be honest with you. Ironically, I won an award on that when I was 11 at school for painting a picture of the sea. And this is a true story. This is not to embarrass myself now, but I won an award on it because the teacher thought I'd done a beautifully abstract version of the sea in a different purple, which is not the colour of the sea. Now, I didn't realise that because I'm colourblind, so I won an award for colour blindness. But sometimes it happens, those things.
Well, every award counts, doesn't it?
Yeah, exactly.
What would you say? I mean, obviously you've been podcasting for quite a few years, probably before the term was generally known to a point, I would say.
Yeah.
What would you say the main learning points have been for you? I know I'm putting you on the spot because, as people perhaps know, watch this show, I never prepare. I just kind of go in and swim or drown, whichever which way.
Usually what I found is when I'm learning from doing podcasting is keeping control of the conversation, really. I'm not talking about I'm bullying the person. You've got to have a direction with it sometimes. You're hosting it. And I've had, back in the early days, spoken label, and I had one person turn up at where we live, actually, should we say, inebriated.
Oh, no, that's not good.
And he was in such a state, I wouldn't let him in the door. I said, no, I can't do it. You're not in a fit state. Come back tomorrow when you're sober. Like, it's just learning how to watch out for pitfalls all the time. And I think if you know the person, it's easier. Sometimes it adds to the fun. I think you're interviewing somebody and you don't know them. Never spoke to them before.
Significantly so. I would say it's also whether I think I'm going to ask you the question rather than state it. Do you think having a natural, real, authentic curiosity about people and their stories is key to being good at podcasting?
Yes, definitely. I think as well, you've got to learn. I think you've also got to be want to speak to people all the time and enjoy chatting to people as well. Because if you don't enjoy chatting to people, or is what you've said, your podcast will sound stilted, and you'll miss the point of it completely, I think.
Yeah, it's something I'm very key on. Really, is I always see it as having a chat with somebody, and you just happen to be recording it. I suppose
that's what I tell people. Tell people all the time. To be honest with you,
yeah. I guess in a way it's a bit like the difference between a journalist being sent in to do a story that they have no real interest in, they're just doing the job, versus actually meeting somebody, digging for the stories, looking for the stories, but you are naturally, authentically interested in people's journeys and what they've achieved and what they've learned in the process.
Yeah, no, I agree. I'm always a believer as well with podcasting. Is you're here. Obviously, if I was doing this podcast, I'd be here to direct you, try and highlight you, and make everybody aware of your story and where the creativity came from. And that's what I feel like I'm there for with that. A lot of it is just I like to get people talking. And when I'm doing my own podcast, I'm usually fairly quiet.
Yeah, well, we started. I think you might have referred to it when you contacted me, but obviously I do this live stream every Friday, and then there's another channel that I do that was started during lockdown, which is called the Passions Project on YouTube, and we're up to about 65 interviews so far, and incidentally that was supposed to be face to face, and then the lockdown happened, so we decided to do everything online. And it's quite funny because the guy I started that with I said to him, they seem to be really enjoying it. And he said, well, I can tell you they are, because they're telling me how much they're enjoying it. He said, but Phil, you shouldn't be surprised, Phil, because they're talking about themselves.
Like it.
And I thought, you know what? There's a certain truth in that, because he's got the little black book that, you'd die for, really. And I won't start name dropping, but we've got some pretty well-known, high-profile guests coming on to it eventually. They've agreed. We've just got to pinpoint the timing of it and everything. And he said they will do it. Ultimately, they will do it because he knows them anyway. But they will do it because they are people who love talking about themselves. So he said, all you have to do is ask them the question, wind them up at the back like with a key, and then just let them out. Let's let them go.
I like it. That's a good way of doing it. I look at things with that one straight away. So I think when you've been doing it for a while as well as podcasts, I found this. I can usually get the most quiet or shy person talking about themselves quite freely. And I've had it before now when the young lady I'm thinking of, who I'm not going to name, she came along physically shaking for the podcast. And I think if you're clever enough where you do it with people, and you clearly are yourself, I can see that, is you know which direction to gently nudge them, not push them like that. You know what I mean? It can help build the confidence up a lot of the time. It does people good, I think, sometimes, actually.
I think that's absolutely true. And one of the things I've seen with Brits, and I've seen this in training courses that I've run as well, is that it's hard to get them to warm up in the first place. You want them I'm massive on engagement and integration and having a lively session rather than death by PowerPoint, me just waffling on for hours. So I want to get them involved, and in the early parts of these sessions, they're quite, they're a little bit reticent, a little bit slow to come out, and you ask them a question and, you can hear the tumbleweed rolling. But after about an hour, once they've warmed up and relaxed, you can't shut them up. You're then trying to say, right, can we stop there now? Because I need to move on, otherwise we'll never get through this. And I've noticed that with Brit. I don't know if it may be the case with people in other countries, but certainly the Brits are like that. A little bit introvert, but then once they start going, they're going.
Yeah, completely. No, I find as well, actually, when you chat people from different areas and countries, even sometimes, some of them, it depends on the person. Where I've had a couple of Canadian people before now, and they've been really, really vocal when they come on straight away. But other times it'd be, like I said, the young lady I spoke to in Brazil, she was almost very, very shy in places. And I think it's interesting because, you learn, you have to make a judgment call immediately with people. They try and work out when you're speaking to them. This applies in person or on Zoom. If you don't know them, you can try and work out in seconds how you're going to approach it.
Yeah, that is very, very true as well. And I think it's just the fact that everybody's different, isn't it?
Yeah.
So what do you find is the most? How does the structure of a podcast about poetry, poetry work?
Right,
obviously, when you're doing a business one, there's certain structure which is fairly obvious. But how does a poetry related podcast work?
Right. I just try to stick to. It's never the case that I have set questions, but I try and split it into two parts. One where, say, we'll chat for 20 minutes, half an hour, and I want them to try and explain to people where they're, like, it's similar to this really, where your creative journey came from as a person, and then where your poetry came from, and then we'll talk about what achievements they've had. And then in the second half of it, because when they've done that bit, I'll stop the recording, let them take a break for a minute if need be. Then I'll get them to read, I'll say, 10 to 15 minutes of their poetry out as a highlight reel in the second half. And I don't tend to have set questions for it, but I like it to try and keep it's a structure I'm looking for more, really. And then when they know what I'm going to do, we can then work our way around it.
Yeah, it's great when you're interviewing people who've got a skill or an artistic skill. I know on Passions we've interviewed a few people who are two or three at least that I can think of that are singers.
Yeah.
Or bands. We've had a couple of bands on as well, just to make, because Passions is such a massive area, as you can imagine. And it's great because you can play their music, and they obviously give you permission to copyright issues, which is always good.
I've had that myself before now. I've interviewed a couple of singers, and I've even done it before now where, I'm not saying this was, where we actually arranged it with the cafe we were in, the lady in question to play a couple of songs, sat on the couch.
Oh, that's superb.
And that's
superb.
Brilliant. It was absolutely superb. I'd never had that like that before, and it was fantastic.
So do you use what platforms do you use online when you're doing it from home, as we are in the new age of things?
Sure.
And what do you use when you're out and about, or is it the same kit you use?
Well, when I'm at home, it's Zoom. Just got I co-run, and I said before, I do a night called Speak Easy, which is like a spoken word open mic night. We did that online for 18 months, but it was running for years before that in person. That's now back in person. So we're still using that as an online night as well for 2 a month. But so I usually use Zoom at home simply because I can just record it at the bottom. And then I've got SoundForge on my laptop, so I will then mix it, make changes and improve the audio if I need to as well. So, but when I'm out and around, I've not done one for ages. But I had a USB for a voice recorder, which is right now broken. So I'm going to have to go and buy another one before I start doing it in person again.
Oh, right. Yeah. So that'll be interesting because there's that much choice. In fact, yesterday there was couple of them were saying to me that they got really interested in the whole thing, and they wanted to invest in the production quality. And they were saying, "Oh, what recorder should I use? What mic should I use? I've been looking, and there's thousands of options." And it's a bit of a kind of it is a bit of a merry-go-round of choices, isn't it, nowadays?
Yeah, I've had podcasts done to me before now when I met all people in Manchester for their podcast. They've just done it on the phone. If your phone's good enough and you've got the right acoustics, that's all you really need. You might need to go along and improve the quality of the recording afterwards, maybe on your laptop, and mix it a little bit. But it's quite big. You can get away with that's the good thing with podcasts with quite basic equipment.
Yeah, I think it's a very valid point you make, and I see it a little bit. A lot of the time, I'm into the gear. I'm one of these people who's into the gear as well as as doing it. And I was saying yesterday, and I've said to lots of clients about what you just said. You do not need all this stuff. But for me, because I'm interested in it, and I suppose it's as much as a hobby as my work, I just find it fun. It's supposed it's a bit like buying a car and then adding, go faster stripes on it and a louder horn and wide wheels and you don't need all that to get from A to B, but it's fun learning it, understanding it, figuring out the differences. You know.
I agree. I think it's we look at the approach of how basic one is all when you've got a podcast recorded is how you promote it, and that's a similar way. What you're saying is like you've always got to look at different ways you approach the recording, and then how that show it to the world, and it's all the same. And the interest is the same. Where basically, if you stand still on it, I can get to go stale quite quick. And that's a good point, what you said there.
Yeah, and it is very. You do have to be wary of audio, don't you? You know, particularly as you know, it's a well-known fact that when it comes to videos, people, if our broadband was a little bit iffy right now, and our physical pictures were a little bit wobbly or slightly pixelating, people wouldn't really be that too bothered. But if our mics are breaking up or our voices are breaking up, people have got a very, very, very low patience, haven't they? When it comes to audio, they'll just switch off.
Yeah, no, completely with it. You find that there is an attention span, and back to what you said before about the obviously younger generation, and it's just even said that before now. The younger generation don't have the attention span we had.
Yeah, I included a slide yesterday that 7 seconds is the latest research.
I know somebody that does a podcast in TikTok, actually. A 1 minute podcast.
Well, yeah, but you know what? That's half the problem, isn't it? That's half the problem is keeping up. You know, I'm a digital media specialist, and every time I'm running any training or coaching, there's something else come along in the previous fortnight. I mean, TikTok was nowhere 18 months ago, 2 years ago. It was, what the hell's that? That's what a clock does, isn't it?
Yeah.
And then suddenly they explode onto the scene, and everybody then is asking you, "Oh, I was thinking about using TikTok for this, that, and the other." And it's never ending. The knowledge side of things, you have to keep on, especially when you're supposed to be the experts. You have to be always on it, keeping up to speed with what's being developed.
Yeah, I think so as well. It's this way technology is changing all the time. Where you look at what we're doing today in this podcast, in 5 years' time, the technology is going to be radically different, and it'll probably be even better than what it is now. Probably like HHHD or something like that.
Yeah, well, I don't know if you've seen there's obviously there's new cameras. That's the other thing. There's new cameras coming out all the time, aren't there? I don't know if you've seen the GoPro Hero 10 has been launched yesterday. Yeah, and you're looking at, is it 5K 120p or something on a little? It's, you know, the size of these, because I've got the Hero 7, and they're only this big, aren't they?
Yeah,
and the Hero 10 is like the same size pretty much, and it's like 5K.
Yeah,
100 frames per second. It's unbelievable.
It's crazy. And that's the way technology is going at the moment. And if you look at things like that, where day job I've got, and we're allowed to play music and listen to podcasts on every day. And that's why I really got into podcasting. And I always do for iTunes or Apple. And the first one of them I had when I got this job 10 years ago was about the size of my Apple or the Kindle I've got here. Nowadays, it's about 6 times as small as that, and it's just everything's getting faster and smaller and quicker and usually cheaper.
Yeah, and I suppose the interesting one in terms of, maybe we need to let's be Nostradamus together for a couple of minutes.
Oh, I love Nostradamus.
Yeah, well, yeah, you'll know a lot more about the reality. I just use it as a phrase, but you'll know the history of the guy probably. But yeah, I mean, how do you see things developing? I mean, I know it's like a $6 million question, but how do you see things developing in this arena in the next few years?
Oh, that's a good question, that one.
It's a tough one, isn't it?
Yeah, it's very, very difficult to judge that, because you can listen to the podcast back from 10 years ago and so, or more. Because I listened to about 20 different ones. And I've got one I like to listen to as a wrestling podcast, actually, because I do love American wrestling a bit. And you can hear it. They put highlights on from shows from 15 years ago of the weekend. And the quality of the recording is not what it is now. It's so much. You can hear the line dropping out all the time and little bits of distortion, and the vocals aren't as clear. So I can see it being, if I'm honest, in 5 years' time, a lot of the major TV channels probably not existing. A lot of the interview shows would have gone. They'd be going this way. This is clearly the way forward, I think.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, nowadays, most people under 25 never put the telly on.
I've not had a TV in 10 years.
Really?
So, yeah, not often.
Well, I rest my case, and you're young. You look younger than me, but everybody's younger than me. But you're a lot younger than me.
I'll surprise you, Phil, afterwards. Tell you how old I am. I'll probably surprise you, mate.
Right. Okay. All right. Well, we don't ask people's age because it's not the dumb thing in the UK, is it?
No.
Especially ladies, of course. But
and that's true. Yeah, and that's true. So no, but you're right. He said I got rid of the TV about 10 years ago, and it was taking up too much time in my life. I wanted to be creative, and I do have Netflix, I do have Amazon Prime, but I can choose what I want to watch then, and it doesn't dictate into my life if I want to be creative that night.
Yeah, I think that's very true. In fact, now you mention it, one of the things I talk to my entrepreneurial clients about is they'll talk about very often about not having time to do things. And the first question I ask them, Andy, is how much time have you spent in the last 4 weeks watching soaps, watching box sets, watching football?
Football,
and very, very quickly, what they learn from that conversation is actually, I do have time. I'm just choosing to use it in other ways. And that's a very different thing than not having it at all.
Yeah, that's what I'm like. I tend to watch. I have a couple of series I watch on Netflix and Prime, and I am a Man City fan, unfortunately, for my sins. But I don't watch every match. I don't get time. I never seem to get time for doing things. I think you're the same when you're running like various projects outside the day job. In my case, I've only got so much time, and often I have to operate things by diary. Whether it's podcasting, I need to get some music done for an album I'm working on, or some poems, or sort out stuff from Speakeasy. There's always something I need to do.
And when you're doing the creative stuff, particularly writing or recording or developing those things, do you find that you have to? Well, two questions really in one. Do you find that you have to be focused, and how easy do you find it to focus?
I've got better over time, that's for sure of it. So that's for sure of it, because sometimes there is a case where you're winging it to a degree where I can't force writing. Writing comes to me naturally. The music side of things, where obviously I can write when I'm on the train heading to and from the day job. I can't exactly pull my keyboard out and start playing on the train. Oh God, no! God help me. No, but it's when I'm doing the keyboard stuff. It'd be I decide that night I'm going to do a couple of hours on it, and it'd be thinking about things I want to approach it on, like my writing ideas I want to look at and see how it develops.
Well, we've got there's a friend of mine watching at the moment called Richard Williams, and this is a bit concerning. I am a married man, just so not that it matters, by the way, Andy, but I am a married man, and but Richard Williams, a good mate of mine, is saying he loves me. But there you go.
Aww.
Even for a northerner, because he's a southern,
you're a nice guy, Richard.
He's a southern shandy drinker, and he's also a West Ham fan, so you can feel sorry for him now, can't we?
Yeah, we do. Yeah. Even though they've beat one, they've had a couple of good wins this year, definitely. So in the football,
yeah. So we do have some good banter, that's for sure. But actually, talking about creativity, Richard actually has been doing some amazing stuff. He was a guest on here a few weeks ago. It might be worth you digging it out actually, because Richard's got into art, and it's something I had no idea. I've known him for 10 years, and I had no idea that he had any artistic ability whatsoever, and all of a sudden he started to put this art online, and the response he's had from it has been amazing. And he started to do some commissions, and then he said he was absolutely shocked that suddenly somebody actually offered him money for one, and he thought, oh,
Brilliant.
So you can imagine how well it fits into this whole thing I'm doing at the moment around researching people's passions.
Yeah, no,
because
completely.
he's an absolute, and he has now jacked in his day job.
Oh, good for him.
And he's now jacked in his day job, and he's now trying to build on the back of what he's managed to do with the art, and he's now starting to build it up now. And it's a wonderful example of somebody who's got a side hustle, but he's obviously got to have pretty big kahunas to give up a very well-paid job, because I know what he was doing. But it was about that whole thing which we talk about a lot on Passions, about the importance of fulfillment in work.
Oh, yeah. It's my case. I mean, I love my day job. If anyone listening knows what my day job is, they know I love it. But it's kind of just took its own course for me, as it always does in life. But yeah, I think I get different sorts of fulfillments in two ways in my life, really. I've got to tell you, Phil, as well, on a slightly different note on this, thinking before about surprising things with you and Richard. I found out fairly recently, because I've got some family, of course, and I found out my sister's 12-year-old son's just started writing poetry.
Wow!
And it was case of wow,
wow!
And that was just like, he's wrote 2, and it's just, I thought myself, I'm going to keep asking every time I see him, have you got another poem yet? And he said to me, Uncle Andrew, stop mithering me.
That's interesting, that though. What's the situation now then, Andy, in schools in terms of the support of what you might call the creative arts, particularly around poetry? When I was at school, it was commonplace as part of our syllabus, even back in 1865 when I was at school. But it was we actually did Blake. I remember doing William Blake and Tiger Burning Bright and all that stuff, and Keats I remember doing as well.
Yeah, I did Keats, Tennyson, and Swinburne himself.
But what is it like in school now? Have you any idea? Are they still doing it, or are they running out of road when it comes to that?
I think they've changed it around somewhat. The syllabus thing has changed, because a part of the story is I know a couple of the writers and stuff that are English teachers, and I know 2 of them have been telling me alone that the way they teach it nowadays is more modern. You still get some of the older poets, and they still love Shakespeare, but I think a lot depends on what school you go to sometimes. Because I've got a session booked in with somebody for spoken label soon, whose poetry has been featured on some modern syllabuses. So it has changed. It has changed, and it can only change more in time to come, because I think the danger was the mistake they made in the 80s when I was growing up. And like I said, in your case as well, would be, if you're trying to encourage people to be creative in their writing, if you're giving them work from over 100 years before, they're not going to relate to it. It's dangerous ground.
That's a fascinating thought.
That's why you've got to, I think, with work, anything over 40, 50 years before you were born, it's the same goes for relationships with life, really. The bigger the gap, and the same with the writing, the further back you go, the harder it is for you to relate to it as a person. Good writing, I think, will show through, but it's a hard one.
Is there any mileage in terms of getting kids engaged in poetry to relate it more to songs?
I think rap seems very popular at the moment, actually, honestly, so, because I know, I don't want to not name names. I know a couple of massive organisations that are encouraging teenagers, and the approach seems to be through rap more than actual straight poetry. Because if you look at, obviously, like music's still rock and roll, really, from the 50s and 60s. Rap's come along in the last 20, 30 years more. And poetry sometimes can look at fuddy-duddy stuff, because it's obviously, it goes back to 2,000 years in some cases.
So in a way, then, is rap the Keats of the 21st century?
I think it is in some ways, actually. Yeah, good rappers. Yeah, there's always been, I think, with poetry and creative work, any sort of thing, there's good and bad on it, and I think the good stuff always will show through. That's why I think rap is definitely it's a sort of street poetry, or talking in some ways, expressing your feelings in some ways. And I've done workshops with children before now over the years, and I've like to say I've helped out some of them learn to express themselves, not necessarily through poetry, just been being able to talk about themselves, and their street language or poetry, whatever you call it, comes from that.
Yeah, and I think as well we've mentioned about the confidence, a lot of confidence issues nowadays, with kids and adults. To be frank,
definitely is. I think it's worse in America, if I'm honest with you. The stories I hear about America, but you're definitely right with that. Society has changed a lot in the past 20 years in England, or probably 30 years really, and it'll change again after both me and you have left this world, big style again. But it is moving on, and I find sometimes you've got to learn to let people be themselves, and then if you can be open-minded enough to accept them for what they are and the creativity as people, they can accept you then. Like I said before, the night we run Speakeasy, we get people coming in there. There's the eldest gentleman's 88, would you believe? And we've got writers. He's fantastic. He's got a wife that's 31 years younger than him.
Oh, blimey, that's another show.
That's another show. I'll put you in touch with him. He's a fantastic guy. But then we've got that younger writers coming at 19 and 20. Different scales of life. And I think if you're good with people, you can learn to talk to people and any whatever stages you're at. You're like that. You're very good. You're clearly a good talker. And you can learn how to deal with people.
Yeah, I think it's I'm a massive believer in self-awareness and the importance of self-awareness. And I know what I'm good at and I know what I'm not good at. It's probably taken a good few years to get to the point where I do have that self-awareness, but I think I do have that self-awareness. And I'm not easily offended. I don't know if it's a northern thing, but I'm just so not easily offended. I'm very like whatever. It's like bald head. I'm only 5'5". I'm just not.
Really? Oh, wow.
Yeah, well, that's the funny thing is though, Andy, that you meet people having done lots of this and lots of webinars and all that kind of thing, and then you meet them in the real world, and we almost probably about 5 out of 10 say you're a lot shorter than I thought you'd be.
Well, I'm 6'1", so I'm not a tall wife.
All right, so
my wife's only 5'2", so she's only a little thing.
Right. Well, I'm taller than her, so there's obviously something that. But self-awareness is a critical thing. But I'm a little bit of a hypocrite, I think, because I've got young kids, an 11-year-old and a 14-year-old, and I've kind of lived my life and live and let them do stuff, but you suddenly find yourself turning it a little bit into your own mother and father, and before you know it, well, why are you doing that? Is it work? Are you not going to waste your time? Are you going to, you're going to get a good job? And it's awful. You're fighting it, but you can't help yourself to be sucked into that slightly controlling parent mindset.
I think that's the way we are as humans sometimes, because I've got no children, but I've seen where my sister basically brings her son up, and she's a very, very good mother. No, not taking that away from her, but she's the boss, and my nephew knows it. That's why. But I think when you're a parent sometimes, and I've got friends, I've got children, it's like you're showing different sides to yourself. Where when you're a parent, you've got to put your parent head on sometimes. And with the children out of the way, then you can relax a bit more sometimes. And I think that's what probably applies to you there.
Yeah, it does. I think what happens is it's being overprotective sometimes. And what I've found, and it can only speak from my own personal perspective, but what I've found is that as I've got older, it's as if I see threat everywhere compared with how I would have seen it 20 years ago.
Yeah, I think
so. Whether it's whether it's I don't know. In 3 or 4 years' time, my daughter she's already got a flipping boyfriend, but let's not go there. But she gets a boyfriend who gets a car, and I was terrassing around when I was 17, 18. I was probably driving terrassing around and bulletproof basically. And now I think the very thought of her driving around or being driven around in a car with a boyfriend, it gives me the EGBGs. And it's not a good thing, by the way. I'm not saying this in a kind of a proud way. It's just, it feels as if you recognize the threat. And I think also sometimes it's like it's like, you know, that whole "it'll never happen to me." Well, you kind of know it does, and it quite possibly will happen to you. Whereas when you're younger, you do have a mindset that says it'll never happen to you.
I think when you're younger sometimes, and it applies to people who've been creative as well. I think you think you're invincible, and then sometimes you find out the hard way you're not, and that's why I think it's when you're older sometimes. I think when you've got additional responsibilities, the fear creeps in. That's why I'm always a firm believer in that. And I think it applies really to if you've been creative as well, because when you're younger, sometimes I found when I was younger in my writing, for example, I used to just throw everything out. And when you get older, sometimes this applies to what you're doing a lot as well, is you take a step backwards, you're more reflective on it sometimes. And when you've got children, you're worried for them because you don't want them to make the same mistakes you did, but you don't want to hit them to hit problems like you might have done when you're younger.
Yeah, you don't want them to hurt.
Yeah.
At the heart of it, I'm just thinking about this as you're talking, and what it is you don't want them to hurt, whether it's emotionally, you know, with the boyfriend or the girlfriend chucks them. You don't want them to hurt, and then you certainly physically don't want them to hurt either. And you know, you sometimes you find, you know, relatives that I've got, and they've had situations where, you know, their daughters have got into some kind of pickle when they were in their mid-20s, and I've seen them actually, the parent in tears. The kid is 25, 26 years old, but they're in tears because they're seeing their child hurt emotionally, you know, chucked with my boyfriend, split up with a boyfriend, whatever it might be. And they're in tears even when they're in their 20s. Never goes away, I don't think.
No, it doesn't. I think as well as the same masculinity side of things, it's very hard for them to see a man cry. And I've only ever seen, if I'm honest, I've only ever seen my dad cry, 4 times. And my dad's 86 nearly. That's why. So, yeah, it's that emotion. It gets very hard. I mean, the older you get, to let it out sometimes through the fear thing.
Well, that's right. And you know, that links very much into the whole mental health thing, doesn't it, for men, and talking about your troubles and your problems, and they're trying to get men to talk more.
Yeah. That's why poetry really, as with all the other creative outlets, they're great and they've never done well. You could talk about anything without preaching at people. It was like, I've got a book on the go. Well, they won't be a couple of years away yet. It's probably took me 10 years to write because I'm diabetic. I became diabetic when I was 39, and it's took me 10 years to get to the stage where I feel I can actually properly talk about it now. And I think the way society goes is, like I said, it's the fear factor. You're afraid of telling people this is who I am, and without preaching, and it's really, really tricky. But I think society is getting more open nowadays.
I certainly would like to think so, with all the amount of push there's been in the media and such like. So I guess that's type 2, is it? Is that type 2 diabetes?
I'm type 1 actually. So
type 1, that's unusual.
It's unusual. But what happened in my case was I got it because you usually get type 1 if you're a child or as an elderly adult. But my dad's got it, so he got it when he was 62. And we found out, I didn't know this at the time until I got it, that my mum's dad had it as well. He died when I was about 2, so I never really knew him. So it was odds on I was going to get it either side.
Right, yeah, absolutely. Because the only reason I asked is because my nephew's type 1, and he was diagnosed with it when he was 5 or 6.
Yeah, one of my best friends got it when he was 4. So my case was I got it when I was 39. I think, if I'm honest, I burnt myself out. I was just simply doing too much outside of work, and my body reacted. That's the one thing I've learned over time, to make sure you rest properly.
Yeah, and do you think that the pandemic has pushed people or influenced people to reflect on a more of a work-life balance as a result of having to stop?
Yes, I think it has. It's made me and my wife certainly slow down a lot more what we were doing. And I think as well it's been harder because I've just started going back to the day job now, and it took a while to get used to the fact that the dreaded commute. And I'm back. I'm used to it now, but it was a while. It took me a couple of weeks to get used to that again, and I've been out of it for working at home for 18 months.
Do you know that? I think you just hit the nail absolutely on the head, especially being in and around Manchester. I've been, all my work's been through online. I've been doing online coaching, online training, online webinars, obviously all this stuff that I'm doing, passions and all the rest of it. It's all been online for 18 months. And it's great because it's meant I could keep going. Unfortunately, I didn't have a cafe or something and a restaurant and all that trouble that people have had with all that. But I went on, when I went to this event to run this event yesterday morning in Preston, from where I'm based in just outside Worsley. I'd ridden 500 yards up the road and I came across my first traffic jam.
Oh wow.
And I thought this isn't good. And then fortunately I was going out of Manchester because I was going up towards Preston, and I was looking at the traffic jams coming back into Manchester and into the the north, into the more central areas of Manchester, and there were queues for a mile or 2 miles, and I thought, how are people adapting to that again?
Yeah, it's weird because we live over in Denton, which is in Tameside, and we live near like a retail park called Crown Point North. And when everything shut last year, you ended up, instead of about 40 shops, 4 were open. And we used to walk around there, me and Amanda, when I was in work, and it was so quiet. It was ridiculous, it was. But then now, as soon as all the shops opened, all we saw on the roads outside us, everything went absolutely berserk on the roads. It's just, you've had 18 months of the quietness and trying to get back to see people on the face-to-face basis. It's been weird because you've had 18 months of reflection, which is sometimes deadly with writers. And I said, but you're trying to go back to where you were, and it's not going to happen. Everybody knows that.
Yeah, I think you've hit the nail on the head. Right, Andy, that's over an hour, so I think we'll close it there. But no, I could have. There's numerous questions in my head, but I'm not going to ask them because we'll be on for 3,000 years, and the internet will blow up.
Probably the way I go, yeah, and I think you're the same as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I told you I had self-awareness. So obviously, thanks very much for joining me today, mate. I really, really appreciate it, and it's great to actually meet you, the new meet you, and all the very, very best with it. Obviously, I hope that the poetry and the creative stuff keeps flowing, and I hope maybe one day, if it's what you want, that you're able to maybe go into that full time. But it might not be something.
Who knows? Who knows? I would say I'm always a believer, and this is a good point to conclude. Really, this is why the way my creativity has gone over the years. One thing, I think things always go naturally to you. And I started off just as a poet, and I've done half a dozen books over the years, and then it went into doing some music, then went to podcasting, and now I co-run a night as well. So and in fact, even my wife's a writer as well. So we met for the creativity. So it's like it's everything goes in, I think, natural progression, and I think it's dangerous if you force it sometimes.
I agree, and that's another learning point in life, isn't it? As you get older.
Yeah.
Okay, mate. Great to meet you, and I'm sure I'll see you again on the road, maybe on the physical road, stuck in a traffic jam around the M60.
I'll wave you if I see you.
Well, thanks for reaching out, and it's been great having you on. Thank you.
Thanks again, Phil.
Take care, mate.
Take care, man.